So I want to talk to you guys about the current situation in Ukraine. This is going to be more of a flow of consciousness video than anything else. I want to express to you guys my thoughts on what has been transpiring in that part of Eastern Europe. One thing that I have noticed over the years is that there are a lot of Russophiles out there. There are a lot of people who are extremely pro-Russia, and all of their sympathies lie with Russia. And then you have people who are extremely anti-Russia, so much so that they really refuse to see the evils that are done by the other side, or they will act as apologists for the other side no matter what. You do have both of these camps. They do exist. They are out there. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, they are out there, especially on the internet. What is lacking is balance. And I think that one of the root causes of all political turmoil is either a lack of balance or an absence of balance. And when you don't have balance, then you refuse to see what the other side is going through. You refuse to see the suffering that the other side is going through. You refuse to see, or you refuse to even hear the arguments of the other side. And there are always going to be arguments from both sides. Always. Here is a question that I have. I've heard, and this really goes without saying, Russia and Ukraine are both traditionally Christian countries. One is Ukrainian Orthodox, the other is Russian Orthodox. Yes, I understand that Ukraine until recently was under the Moscow Patriarchate, but recently they, thanks to the Patriarch in Constantinople, Bartholomew, Ukraine recently got its own Kiev Patriarchate. And even in that, you have violent division between Ukrainian and Russian. You have racial tension, or I should say tribal tension, in Ukraine between ethnic Russians who are pro-Moscow and Ukrainians. And it's tribalism. I mean, let's be real here. It is tribalism. That's what's happening. And that tribalism manifests itself in the religious divisions between Russians and Ukrainians. And it was only just a few years ago or so, that the Ukrainian parliament, and I think this was back in 2018, the Ukrainian parliament stated that churches that are under the Moscow Patriarchate have to make it known that they are under the Moscow Patriarchate. And then you ask yourself, well, what the hell is the purpose of that? It's all tribalism, all of it. And I sincerely feel bad for the people of Ukraine. Civilians in Ukraine are caught in this war. Civilians have been killed. Civilians are dying. It's horrible. I know somebody who lives in Ukraine, and we talk here and there on and off, and he is in Odessa in some apartment. And it sucks. It's a terrible situation to be in. You're in the middle of a war in an apartment in Odessa, which is one of the main cities that Russia wants to take over because it wants to control the Black Sea. And Odessa is a port city on the Black Sea. So because Russia wants the Black Sea, Russia wants to take over Odessa. And so Odessa is one of the hot spots of this conflict. It is a terrible situation to be in. I feel sorry for the people there. I honestly do. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, Russia is right. Russia is absolutely right. Russia is in a war with NATO. And what we are seeing is a violent rivalry, one that has been going on since the Cold War. It really hasn't ended. I mean, we sit here and we say, oh yeah, the Cold War is over, blah, 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 blah. It's not over. It's never ended. I mean, America going into Iraq, overthrowing Saddam Hussein, America going to Syria and arming rebels to overthrow Bashar al-Assad because he is essentially a puppet leader for Russia. What's that about? That's the Cold War. It's the continuation of the same system of proxy fighting that went on in the Cold War. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, yes, Russia is absolutely right because they're terrified of NATO expansion eastward. That's one of the main arguments of Russia, that they are concerned about NATO expansionism. Countries who join NATO are afraid of Russia. Georgia joined NATO after it got taken over by Russia. Georgia wanted to be in NATO. The majority of the population in Georgia wanted to be in NATO and in the European Union. There were two provinces within Georgia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia. They were the two provinces that refused to be that refused to be under Tbilisi. They didn't want to be a part of Georgia. They wanted to be satellite states for Russia. And so Georgia went to war with those two regions because Georgia wanted to force those two regions to be under Tbilisi. And so Russia intervened in that conflict and backed South Ossetia and Abkhazia. I mean, Georgia wanting to get those two regions to be under its power, that's exactly what America did in the Civil War. I mean, we had states leaving the Union, and America went to war and forced those states to join the Union. So I can't blame Georgia for doing what it did, but Russia exploited that division to justify invading Georgia. And Russia wants to revive its empire. This is about power. This is about power, nothing more, nothing less. Russia is concentrating its military might in the southern part of Ukraine because it wants the Black Sea. That's the reason why. It wants to control the Black Sea. Turkey is right across from Ukraine. It's also on the Black Sea. And Turkey is blocking Russia's navy from going through the straits. And that's also going to piss off the Russians. And eventually there's going to be a war between Turkey and Russia because they both want to revive their empires. It's like two dogs fighting for the same bone, and that bone is power. So I'm not going to sit here and praise Russia. I'm not going to sit here and praise the Kremlin. Russia backs separatists in Ukraine. I mean, this is like Iran backing the Houthis in Yemen. This is like the United States backing rebels in Syria. Just as America exploits the polarization that happens in other countries so that America can benefit from that division and justify foreign policy in those countries, such as regime change, etc. Russia also exploited the division in Ukraine, just as it exploited the division in Georgia. So Russia does what America does. And if NATO wasn't so powerful, Russia would be doing the same exact thing that NATO has been doing. Russia would be just as powerful as NATO is right now if NATO wasn't as big. So all this stuff about, well, evil NATO or Russia's perfect, that's all just, it's LARPing, okay? That's not to say that Russia doesn't do anything good, and that's not to say that NATO is perfect, but what I'm trying to say is that we have to be balanced. Yes, Ukraine was a part of Russia. Yes, the Russian Empire begins with Ukraine. Yes, Christianity in Russia begins in Kiev. I understand all that stuff. But the reality is that most people in Ukraine don't give a shit about any of that stuff. They don't give a damn if their country was part of Russia. They don't care if their country was under the Soviet Union at one point in time. Hell, the Soviet Union starved countless people to death in the Ukraine. It's called the Holodomor. Go read about it. The Ukrainians still remember it. So the Ukrainians don't want to be under Russia. Yeah, they were under Russia at one point in time. Well, you know what? The southwest of the United States was under Mexico at one point in time. Alaska was under Russia at one point in time. So what? Russia has a right to invade Alaska? I mean, I don't. It's just nonsense. So, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and just praise Russia. Now, let's talk about NATO. NATO is complaining about Putin, saying that Putin is this evil dictator monster and Russia is evil and we should not buy Russian vodka because Putin is evil. Well, NATO backed Saudi Arabia in its war in Yemen. And the United States gave tens of billions of dollars in weapons to the Saudis in arms deals. And Saudi Arabia did a food embargo on Yemen, blocked Yemen from getting food, bombed Yemen, and literally tens of thousands of people starved to death in Yemen because of Saudi Arabia's blockade on that country. And did I see anybody on Instagram putting up the flag of Yemen? Did I see anybody on Facebook or Twitter with the flag of Yemen? No one gave a shit about Yemen. No one cared. Why? Well, for one, because the propaganda machine in the West didn't care, because Saudi Arabia is one of our guys. And that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Who's suffering? Is it one of our guys? No, we don't give a shit. In fact, we'll give weapons to the other side so they can kill those people even more, because those people are a friend of Russia or they are just collateral damage in our proxy war against some ally of Iran or some proxy of Iran or Russia, etc. If the person who is suffering is one of our guys, then yes, we'll plaster that person's flag everywhere. Another reason why I think most people didn't give a crap about Yemen is because Yemenis aren't white. Let's be real here. Yes, there is favoritism that people have that's based on skin color. Yes, it's based on appearance. Are those people Nazis? No, not necessarily. It's just that people tend to prefer to look at certain people as opposed to others. It's just a fact. Case in point, there was a war in Ethiopia not too long ago. Tons of people died. People were being burned alive. People were getting hacked to death with axes. It was absolutely horrific. Nobody gave a shit. I was writing about what was happening in Ethiopia. Nobody gave a damn. Nobody cared. Another example, there was a war that broke out in 2020 between the Armenians and the Azeris over some little region called Nagorno-Karabakh, probably half the size of Delaware, maybe. Nobody cared. I was writing on what was happening in that conflict. I even interviewed a doctor who was living in Nagorno-Karabakh. I had another Armenian person do the translation for me because this doctor couldn't speak English. She did the translation for me. She helped me with the subtitles. I put the subtitles in. I spent a lot of time on it. Nobody cared. Nobody gave a damn. And why don't people care about Armenia? Because it's Armenia and Georgia. Are they even European? Kinda, sort of. They're kind of like a mix between Middle Eastern and European, I think. Not racially speaking, but like geographically speaking. They're almost like in a transitional point. Even culturally speaking, they're at this transitional point between Europe and the Middle East. They're kind of like Russians, but they're kind of like Iranians at the same time. And even their languages. I mean, the Armenian language is very close to Persian. But nobody cares. Now, Ukraine, Ukraine is a European country. It is a European country. Even though it's not in the EU, it is a European country. Kiev looks like any other major European city. It looks like a very, very European city. Armenians, they look kind of European. They look kind of Middle Eastern. Kind of dark. Kind of olive skin. Azeris, they're Turks. So, basically Middle Eastern, kind of Near Eastern people. Who really cares, right? Who really cares? But Ukrainians, those are Europeans. Here's another case in point as to what I mean. Poland, for years, was refusing to take in refugees from the Middle East. There was a little propaganda war between Belarus and Poland. It was a little, I guess you could say, a little psyop done by the Belarusian government in which Belarus was sending in refugees from Afghanistan and Syria into Poland. And Poland said, no, we don't want to take in these refugees. And it was a way for Belarus to agitate Poland. And I think the Belarusians were hoping that maybe the Polish border guards would fire on the Belarusian border guards and get Russia to intervene in the situation. That's at least what I heard from Polish media. But the Poles did not want those migrants. And another reason why they didn't want those migrants in was, other than not wanting to take in migrants sent by Belarus, which is a satellite state for Russia and thus an enemy of Poland. Another reason why was because the Polish government knew that if they started taking in these refugees, they would receive the frustration of the people because the government in Poland is conservative. And one of the things that they marketed themselves as was a party against mass immigration. And if they started taking in refugees from Syria and Afghanistan, well, that wouldn't look good to their voters, to their voting bloc. But a war breaks out between Russia and Ukraine, and who takes in the bulk of the refugees? 1 million people have fled Ukraine so far. It's probably over that by now. Who took in the bulk of these refugees? Poland. Poland took in, I think, most of these refugees. If I'm wrong about that, then it's definitely a substantial amount of the refugees. Poland did not hesitate to absorb Ukrainian refugees. Why? It's because Ukrainians and Poles look the same. That's why. Their languages are similar. Religiously, they are similar. Poland is Catholic. Ukraine is mostly Orthodox, although there is a substantial Catholic population in that country. But they look the same, regardless of the fact that no Syrian has ever orchestrated a massacre of 100,000 Poles. No Afghan has ever masterminded the massacre or the genocide of Polish people. The only people who have orchestrated genocide on the Polish people were white people. That's it. If you look at the massacre of the Poles, if you look at the genocide or the Holocaust or whatever word you want to use for extermination of the Polish people, it was done by whites. The Soviet Union, was headquartered in Moscow. Wasn't headquartered in the Middle East. And the Ukrainians in Volhynia, in East Galicia, in Lviv, and some other areas, in the Chelm or the Chelm, or however you pronounce it, they butchered around 100,000 Polish people because they were Poles. They weren't Muslims. They weren't Middle Eastern. These were white people from traditional Christian backgrounds butchering other white people who were also traditionally Christian. It's horrific, but it was tribalism. It wasn't... it had nothing to do with religion. It was racism, tribalism, the hatred of your neighbor. That's all it was. And why did these Ukrainian ultra-nationalists butcher their Polish neighbors? Why? Because Poland defeated Ukraine in the Polish-Ukrainian War from 1918 to 1919 and took a chunk of Ukrainian territory, and all of these ethnic Ukrainians were now living under the Polish government. Polish occupation. We must end the Polish occupation. And in the name of ending the Polish occupation, you butcher and you rape and you cut to pieces your neighbors? Because Poland took territory. That's the reason why. People will look to evil people. I shouldn't say people because I don't want to generalize things here. Evil people will find any reason to murder their neighbor. And they don't care if their neighbor is the same religion as they are. They will kill their neighbor and they will find a reason to do so because they are evil and they are bloodthirsty. Poland defeating your country in a war and taking a piece of your territory is not a justification to exterminate people. And you have this war going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and you have people saying, well, no, it's because those two self-declared republics, Luhansk and Donetsk, they're pro-Russian, and so there was a war between Ukraine and those republics. Well, hold on a second. Ukraine is at war with those two self-declared republics because they're separatist. This is like if Louisiana and Mississippi decided to rebel against Washington. What do you think Washington would do? Do you think Washington would be like, well, they've declared themselves as independent republics, so now we have the independent state of Louisiana and Mississippi, and so, you know what, just let them be because that's their self-determination? Do you think Washington would actually do that? America had a civil war, and America went to war with the southern states because America wanted those states to be in the Union. And the Ukraine doesn't care if those two regions are self-declared republics or if the people running them are pro-Russia. Ukraine wants to keep its country intact. It doesn't want to allow for separatist states to be empowered and to thrive. Plus, if you allow those two separatist states to remain there, they're just going to be literal Russian puppet states within your country, within your zone. So I don't blame the Ukrainians for wanting to defeat those separatists. Any of people who will say, well, it's because those regions are pro-Russia, so that's the reason why. They should just be allowed to be there. That's not how things work. And so in the name of supporting separatism, you back Russia. And so in the name of wanting to defeat an occupation, you butcher your neighbors. And I'm going to now turn it against Ukraine. I'm going to mention Ukraine here. The Ukrainian nationalists, they hate those pro-Russian, the people who are pro-Russia. They hate those people. And now that Russia is in a war with the Ukraine, the hatred towards Russians has intensified. So just as Ukrainian fascist butchered their Polish neighbors because they hated being under a Polish occupation, I would not doubt that in the future, Ukrainian ultranationalists are going to try to hunt down and murder every single ethnic Russian living in Ukraine. It just wouldn't surprise me if that were to happen, because they did the same thing in the past against the Poles. In fact, Christianity is on the decline in Ukraine. Christianity is on the decline in Eastern Europe. A lot of people have turned to neo-paganism. A lot of people in Russia have turned to neo-paganism. Hell, a lot of people in Poland have turned to neo-paganism. So I'm just done with this whole idea of finding a country and just praising it. Oh, yes, these people are going to save us. Oh, yes, these people are going to save us. Oh, Russia, yes, they're absolutely right. Oh, NATO, oh, NATO's absolutely wrong. Oh, NATO's absolutely right. NATO backed Saudi Arabia, and under the Saudi blockade, tens of thousands of people starved to death in Yemen, and NATO didn't give a damn. Russia exploits the tension between ethnic Russians and Ukrainians, and then enters into that country to take it over because it wants resources and it wants power over the Black Sea. America does the same type of stuff. Syria, there's divisions between the government and the people, arm the rebels. Libya, there are divisions between the government and the people, arm the rebels. Even though those rebels are racist who would later enslave Africans and butcher people and commit massacres, who cares? America doesn't care. And this is the problem with any sort of discourse on these types of issues, this type of subject matter. Everybody wants you to take a side. Are you pro-Russia? Are you pro-Ukraine? Do you support are you on the side of the Shiite or the Sunni or whatever? Like, everybody wants you to take a side. And because of that type of paradigm, people will focus on certain predictions that they may have, or their questions are based off of some kind of fear that really stems from propaganda, like, is America going to go to war with Russia? Like, does this mean a war between America and Russia over Ukraine, and et cetera, et cetera? Or, who's going to win this war? Is it going to be Russia or is it going to be Ukraine? And I don't really focus so much on those types of predictions. I focus on the geopolitical ripple effect of whatever happens. So Russia invading Ukraine, that means that the Germans are going to start focusing more on strengthening their military. That's how I see it. Germany is going to start reviving their military power. Germany is going to start turning to militarism. That's how I see things. I see things as you have an event that takes place, but then you have the geopolitical consequences or the geopolitical ripple effects that transpire as a result. Russia entering Ukraine, the ultranationalists in the Ukraine are going to gain more popularity. They're going to have a revival for their own movement. Russia going into Ukraine also means Turkey becoming more nationalistic, because historically it has been an enemy of Russia. So Turkey is going to start turning more towards nationalism. It's going to it already has nationalism, but it's going to intensify its nationalism. It's going to further intensify its militarism. That's how I see things. There's a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan wins the war. That means a win for Turkey. That means further Turkish advancement. Turkey wants this corridor to be built between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, and that would allow easy travel between Nakhchivan and Azerbaijan. Well, that also means that Turkey would have very clear access into Nakhchivan, through Armenia, into mainland Azerbaijan, and then from Baku right into the Caspian Sea, from the Caspian Sea right into Central Asia. Oh, the Americans are leaving Afghanistan. That means that NATO is going to look to its biggest Muslim member, its most armed, or its second most armed member, Turkey, to fill in the gap of the United States. That means an advancement of Turkish influence and geopolitical leverage and hegemony. And that's really it. That's how I see things. I'm not going to take sides. I am not going to play favoritism. Every time that I have played favoritism, it has always ended up biting me in the ass. Always. Because if you pick a side and you defend that side indiscriminately, do you know what happens? That side that you praise and that you defend will do something evil, and then now what? Now you look like you look like a propagandist. And you look like, frankly, you look like a jackass. I'll be honest with you. So I'm not going to sit here and do this. I'm not going to play this favoritism stuff. Yeah. Anyway, those are my thoughts, guys. And yeah, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.